Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of TechTalk with Aegis. A lot of organizations today are already running critical workloads on AWS, but one thing we still see very often is this assumption that once you are in the cloud, your data is automatically protected. And the reality is that's not entirely true. AWS provides very strong infrastructure resilience, but when it comes to your data, your backups, your recovery capability, that responsibility still sits with you. At Aegis Cloud, we work with many organizations across different industries. And one pattern we consistently see is this. Companies may have backups, but when it comes to actual recovery, that's where things start to break down. So today, we are going to talk about AWS backup, not just from a do you have backup perspective, but more importantly, how do you ensure that your data is actually recoverable when it matters most? And to dive deeper into this, I'm joined today by Mr. Nigel from Veeam. Hi, Nigel. Thank you for your
Hello.
time today.
Hello.
Okay,
Yeah.
now let's start with something we hear very often from customers.
Okay.
AWS already has native backup and snapshots. So, from your perspective, where do these fall short when it comes to real recovery?
Okay. From this perspective, is that AWS native backup and the AWS backup capabilities are strong fundamentals. Okay. So, but they are not the same as the end-to-end recovery strategy. That's for sure. But where I really want to emphasize is that where organizations often struggle from moving away, we captured a snapshot, a point-in-time copy to a situation where you can reliably restore the business applications. So that's one thing that I like to emphasize. But in practices, the gaps usually show up during the standardizations and repeatability. That means a lot of times different scenario has different outcomes. So also have different services, has different restore behaviors, and also the different teams owns different portion of the services in AWS. And this makes restorations become very manual and also a very ticket-driven exercise. So another point I also want to really cover is that real recovery usually need consistent protections across different type of workloads. So what I mean is that we need to have a clear operational processes and the ability to execute and restore quickly and predictably. So what we mean is that we have to execute this at scale and also under a lot of tremendous stress in the event of real disaster. So a lot of times that many organizations also need standardized recovery across like such as hybrid or multi-cloud, not just different tool set per platform. So that's where it makes Veeam unique is that Veeam focus on turning these building blocks into a repeatable operational recovery process with a centralized management. And also the important is that the consistency of the policies. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very important point. And following that, one of the biggest concerns today is actually about ransomware and security breaches.
Yep.
Okay, so now comes to the second question. How does Veeam ensure that backup data in AWS remains protected from ransomware or compromised credentials?
Um, Veeam's approach is layered and structured in a way that one of the key element is immutability. So even if the credential has been compromised, the attackers can't simply encrypt or delete the backup restore points during the retention period window. Window, yeah. So in AWS, this Veeam, we have distribution Veeam backup for AWS that supports strong backups to Amazon S3 with object log capabilities. In short, it's immutable, so you can design your deployment with the separation of duties and isolated backup resources to reduce the blast radius. That means minimize the surface attack vector. So on top of that, Veeam has best practices to align with the principles of least privilege, separation of duties, and isolating backup resources so that the attacker will not have any access or have the same credentials uh, and the pathway to destroy both the production and the backup data. So in this sense, the combined effect is very substantial in the event that if a credential compromise scenarios, you can always maintain a clean recovery point and a viable path to restore any data that you need in the event of data recovery. So the goal is very simple. Even in the worst case scenario, you can always have a clean and trusted recovery point that you can safely rely on.
So based on what we gather, many organizations still keep backups within the same environment.
Yep.
So from your experience, how important is separating backup from the production AWS environment?
It's extremely critical, I think. So it's one of the most practical way to reduce risk quickly. If the backup sits in the security boundary as a production, they often share the same blast radius lah. So it means that the compromised admin identity an overly defined IAM policy or a disruptive automation change can really affect both production workloads and the backup that you are relying on to recover. So a clean separation often requires a separate AWS account for backup with an independent permissions and control. So that means we need to create a very meaningful barrier. So even if the production's environment is fully impacted, you are far more likely to retain a protected backup data in a very controlled environment, recovery environment. So from a governance standpoint, right, it also clarifies the ownership and the process flows. And what it matters a lot during an incident. So this occurs when there is an incident where time and access are both constrained. So yeah, so that's my address to how separating backup from production and backup is extremely important.
And interestingly, many organizations they do have backup,
Yep.
but when an incident occurs, a recovery doesn't always go as planned. From your experience, where do organizations get it wrong when it comes to recovery?
I'm going to talk about 3 points lah. So one of the first point is that more often than not, organizations, admin, right, they don't test the restorations process often enough. So I need to emphasize a lot of this is that backups are usually not valuable until they are proven recoverable. So without a routine test, right, in the actual recovery scenarios, issue tends to show up during an outage. So this can include missing dependencies, wrong permissions, and even restore times that doesn't meet the business SLA. So that's number one. So number two is most of the time the design of the architecture is meant for backup and fail to consider the recoverability aspects of the design. It means that it's easy to collect restore points, but it's harder to design architectures that is meant for ransomware proof, large scale restorations, and predictable restoration RPO and RTO. So this is where immutability, isolation, and also clear runbooks matters is very important. And the third point is that a lot of admins or organization tends to runs on assumptions. So they assume that snapshot is application consistent. So that means that they assume DR will be straightforward and assume that the right access will assist during an incident. So those assumptions tends to fail and they fail usually exactly at the wrong time. Yeah.
And these are very valid points of why
Yep.
sometimes
Correct.
recovery doesn't actually happen as planned.
Yes. Exactly.
And also in today's environment, very few organizations are purely cloud.
Mhm.
Most are running some form of hybrid
Okay.
or on-premise combined with AWS.
Okay.
Now, how does Veeam handle backup across AWS and on-premise together?
So so that's where Veeam comes into the picture. So Veeam platform, data platform is built for hybrid. So in the aspect that you are not managing separate backup islands with different processes and different level of maturity. So that's where organization utilize and leverage Veeam to apply a consistent operational approach that refers to policies, retention goals, reporting and recovery expectations. So that address workloads across on-premises environment and including hybrid environments and multi-cloud environments that includes AWS workloads. So this kind of consistency becomes increasingly important, that an applications span across multiple applications and tends to have require the admin to figure out a single way to address, are we protected and can we recover from workloads from multi-cloud or hybrid cloud environment. So practically, this gives customers the flexibility to to flex their muscles in the architecture of how backups and recovery works. So in this case, like protecting on-premises workload with Veeam data platforms, VDP in short, protect AWS workloads with Veeam backup for AWS, and these both solutions platforms can align both common governance and also resilient practices. So this refers to also the real world recovery options supportability. So let's say restoring where it makes sense for the incidents. And the whole importance and essence of this is that you don't need to rebuild the entire process from the scratch from different type of platforms. Yeah.
Now, interesting perspective that has been provided by Nigel earlier. Now comes our last question. If a company is already running workloads in AWS today, what is the first thing that they should review in their backup strategy?
Okay, this is a very simple yet complex question. What I would think of is start looking out for service provider that can provide you the importance of disaster recovery and data protection strategy. So think no more, look for Aegis Cloud. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, that's right, Nigel. For more info about Aegis AWS backup, please go over to Aegis website at aegis.com.my, and you'll be able to see our AWS backup architecture, whereby we have 3 different types of architecture to assist customer in their backup needs. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you, Nigel, for joining us today, and thank you everyone for tuning in to this episode. See you again next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye. I think one key takeaway from today's discussion is this. Backup is not just about storing data. It's about making sure you can actually recover when it matters most. If you are currently running workloads on AWS, it might be a good time to take a closer look at how your backup is structured. If you'd like to explore how Aegis Cloud can help design a recovery-ready backup strategy, feel free to reach out to us.